I love Cold Steel. Cold Steel is probably my favorite knife company. I like the bigger, more over-the-top blades. They sell, I like the super strong locking mechanisms, just overbuilt, overpowered, cool knives. And they're completely functional, too. They're not toys. They're not cheapos. But that being said, most of their knives are more on the affordable side. Yeah, a lot of them are overseas produced, but if you get knives that size with those materials, with that quality, and make them here in the U.S., ooh, you're going to be asking a lot. Their knives would easily reach a couple $100 for their medium-sized ones. They'd go up from there. This is another home run from Cold Steel. It's one of my instant favorites. I've tried almost every single Cold Steel. I'm completely blown away by this thing. I looked at very few reviews, just looked at some pictures of it. It looked interesting. I didn't know a whole lot about it. Read the specs, and I was kind of like, yeah, that sounds like it's kind of big. It's going to probably be about the Recon 1's size, because it says it's got a 4-inch blade, yada, yada. I got it in the mail, and as soon as I felt the package, I knew it was going to be a massive, heavy folder, and it instantly made me fall in love with it as soon as I pulled it out of the box. It's just kind of a lesson how you can read specs, you can look up things online, and even watch a video of somebody holding a knife and you go, yeah, it looks kind of big. But it's different to actually experience the knife in your hands. Band-aid on my index finger right here. Has nothing to do with knives. It was not a knife-related injury. It's actually a very boring story. So I'm not even going to tell you about it. I just know somebody's going to point out, you got a cut on your hand, you idiot. No, but this knife is absolutely amazing. It's really big, it's really heavy, and I know Cold Steel's known for making lots and lots of huge, just massive over-the-top folders, but this is one of their few massive over-the-top folders. It's not super long. It's just the width, the weight to it, how chunky it is. I mean, just take a look at it. It's insanity. It's not like they took a knife of theirs and increased the length of it. It's like they took a knife and they maximized the girth, the width, everything. They just amplified the entire thing. And that's what's interesting. Let's put it right next to a very notorious big knife of theirs, and one of my favorites, the Voyager XL. Absolutely fantastic, amazing knife for the money. Now look at them side by side. The Voyager you'd probably say, yeah, it's bigger. It's longer for sure if you put them just from handle to handle. Yeah, you got like 1.5 inches or so extra on the Voyager right here. But if you look at everything, okay, the thickness is basically the same thing. But the width of the handle, how much material is there, how broad the blade is. Look how much wider that blade is. It's got to be one of the widest blades I've ever seen on a folding knife, period. It's insanity. It's kind of like you took an XL Voyager and just kind of squeezed it down a little bit. Not cut the length off, but you made it thicker, made it wider. Excellent knife, by the way. I love these knives. Love the Voyagers. It's rare Cold Steel comes out with stuff like this. And they have lots and lots of XLs. They got the Talwar, the Holdout, the Counterpoint, the Tylite 6-inch. They're coming out with a new, I think, the Mayhem. I can't wait for that knife. I'm going to get that one as soon as that comes out. That's one of the few knives I've been excited for in a long time from Cold Steel. That one, absolutely can't wait to get that one. This is being filmed April 2022, by the way, so we'll see how that goes. But let me get the specs out of the way. Very simple. We have a blade length of 4 inches. Yeah, and 4 inches is big. You know, a 4-inch bladed knife, that's a big knife. Yeah, 4 inches. It's kind of on the larger size. But this knife it's no joke. It's massive. It's super, super heavy. It's actually insane how heavy it is. Again, you just read specs real quick. Like, yeah, it must be kind of big. But you actually get it in your hand, you realize how wide it is. It's a massive, massive knife. Even if the length alone, it doesn't seem like it's that huge. Handle length, 6 inches. Overall length, 10 inches on the nose. AUS 10A blade steel right here. It is stonewash finish. It's what I would call a drop point. Beautiful stonewash finish on there. Absolutely love stonewash finishes, not just for cosmetic reasons, but for functional reasons as well. I'll get right into that. Dual thumb studs, kind of shaped like a cone that got cut off on the top. I like this little screw design they have on here. Works every single time. Triad locking mechanism. You probably know all about that by now if you've seen Cold Steel videos. This is one of their thickest lock bars I've seen, one of their thickest stop pins I've seen too. It's insanity. It's super tough. Easily one of the strongest locking mechanisms in the whole world. I love the cutouts right here too that are aligned with the lock bar. Thank you, Cold Steel, for doing that. They don't do that on a lot of their knives. They'll cut out the handle itself, but not have it line up with the lock bar. I don't know why they did that for the longest time, but now they didn't. They fixed it. Thank you, Cold Steel. The price, $129.99 is the retail, but you can get these for around the $85 range. Is that worth it? Yeah, that's worth it. There's a lot of material you're getting here. It's huge. It's a big, big knife. Do not let specs deceive you. Don't just look at the length. You want to look at everything. And, it's kind of difficult to find specs on girth, stuff like that. You're usually just going to see length because that's what matters most typically when it comes to folding knives. So it weighs 10.2 ounces. It's a very, very heavy knife. Absolutely one of the heaviest knives out there for this length anyway. A 10-inch knife, 10 ounces. So basically an ounce per inch of length. That's crazy. I don't remember what this is offhand. The XL Voyager. I'm just comparing it to that one. This one's definitely lighter, though. Similar materials. We have an FR. We have FRN handles on both of them, but the main thing is that the Voyagers have aluminum liners, which for whatever reason, Cold Steel did not use on any other of their knives, as far as I know. We have steel liners right here that are not flush mounted, by the way. They're just parallel mounted. I don't know what else you would call that. Big old backspacer right there. It's absolutely beautiful. Every detail of this knife. It looks very technical. It's kind of elegant in an odd way. Just I'm going to assume these are stonewash liners. They could be bead blasted, but it doesn't really matter. Tip up carry, which is swappable to the right side. You can see there's pre-screwed in hardware right there that you can take out. It'll just help prevent gunk and dust and crap get in there. But this screw for sure will definitely aid in securing the lock bar. Not the lock bar, sorry, the backspacer. That's the lock bar. That's the backspacer. Tip up carry only. Most people will not care about having the tip down. I don't like tip down, but I don't mind it. If a knife only has tip down, I'll take it. But tip up, I think, is much better. Pocket clip design works very well. It is stonewash finish. It's kind of phallic looking right there. Yeah. Sorry, I may have ruined the pocket clip for a lot of you who like this pocket clip initially. I apologize, but it's kind of squared off, so and most people aren't going to think that initially. Just when you look at it for a while, you're like, ooh, yeah, maybe they should have changed that. But maybe some people like that. I don't know. Very comfortable. Again, a lot to hold on to on the handle here. Oh, I should talk about the handle. So it is FRN. They call it Grivex or Grivery. It's FRN. Fiberglass reinforced nylon, glass, and plastic mixed together. Very strong stuff, very light. The texture on here is almost like a skateboard tape. Look very closely at that texturing. It's like a random pattern, little beady looking things right there. It's one of the grippiest textures I've ever had on an FRN handle. It almost feels like G10. It feels very, very close to G10, and what I like about FRN is that it lasts forever. I love G10. Love you, G10, mean it. Here's a Cold Steel Recon 1, by the way, an old one back from 2014 or something. But it softens with use. The more you rub your thumb against it, the more you use it, it gets softer and softer and softer. It gets less grippy over time. FRN basically lasts forever as far as that's concerned. Not quite as aggressive as like this iron cross design they have on the Voyager. That's a grippy texture. If you want something grippy, go with that. But this feels more like a sandpaper like grip. They're both, I don't know. Maybe this one's just a little bit grippier on the Voyager, the iron cross pattern. It's a more pronounced pattern in there. This more looks like a bunch of blasting done to it. I don't know what the process is in particular, but it's still very, very grippy. One issue I will get out of the way with this knife immediately is it has a tight pocket clip. I don't really think it's a pocket clip itself. It could be the combination of, okay, yeah, it is the pocket clip. Pocket clip's tight. It's tight, and then the combination of having such a grippy handle right here, it's gonna get stuck to your pocket pretty readily. Now, the advantage to having a tight pocket clip is that the knife will not fall out of your pocket so easily. It will actually stay locked in there. That's good. I prefer an overly tight pocket clip than an overly loose pocket clip, I will say, so there's that at least. But it does this thing where you try to reach the knife out of your pocket for an easy task, and then your hand kind of like slips off of it, and the knife's like, no, and it's like holding on for dear life onto your pocket. Like, whoa, what just happened there? You really got to grip on it and then yank it out. It's on the tighter side for sure. And with such a big knife, it's not the end of the world because there's a lot to grip onto right here. Again, there's a decent amount poking out of your pocket right there. People are going to look at this and see that, okay, you got a knife there. They see the silver-ish colored blade right there. This looks like a knife, and it looks like a big, wide, aggressive knife in your pocket. Not like most Cold Steels. Most Cold Steels, they have a stubby pocket clip about this length, but the knife will be really long, the blade won't really be as wide, and maybe there's a black colored one, again, like the Recon one I just showed there. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot there, but this is going to look like a massive knife. So there is a lot to hold on to, but When pulling out of the pocket, I notice it's just a little tight. If I were in a defensive type situation, I would really be hoping I wouldn't accidentally have this thing fly out of my hand when I'm trying to grab it out. I'd probably use a lot of force in attempting to get it out of my pocket, and then I would be afraid of accidentally letting go of it or accidentally having it fling out of my grip. Who knows, but it's got a very tight pocket clip, just keep that in mind. So it's very heavy. It is not skeletonized at all. If they skeletonized this, they may have been able to get it down to like 9.5 ounces or something at the very lightest. But regardless, that's still a it's very, 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 very heavy. This is probably the heaviest knife they have for this length. Again, length is not everything. It can be misleading. It's so wide. It's a very wide. We have a very broad, wide blade here, and that's where a lot of the weight is coming from. Beautiful shape, by the way. It almost reminds me of like a bullet or something. I would have loved to see this in like a Tonto. Oh man, a big old, wide, aggressive Tonto. I'm the Tonto guy. I love Tonto blades. You've been watching my videos at all? You know that Mannix likes his Tontos, but this is still really functional. Absolutely. Flicks out every single time. It's extremely smooth. I have absolutely no issues deploying this knife whatsoever, despite being so huge. Now, lock bar knives, back lock knives, lockback knives, whatever to call them, they do not have a ball-bearing detent that retain the blade. They just utilize the pressure from the back spring, or the torsion bar right here, if you can see very closely. It's right in there. They rely on that to keep the knife in place. It's just the mechanics of it. So although there's no ball-bearing detent holding it into place, the pressure holds it in place. You have to rely more on a little bit of a wrist flick. You don't need very much. It's not a very big deal. You don't need to build up pressure either. You just lightly push the blade out with your thumb. Lightly. You don't have to build up a lot of pressure and flick it. You just kind of lightly loosen the tension there and then move your wrist a little bit, and it kind of just does the rest. The weight of the blade just kind of goes with the flow and it locks in place. So despite being very strong locking mechanisms, despite these blades being very heavy, despite the knives being very heavy in general, you don't actually need to try that hard to deploy them with one hand, which is kind of cool. You can open it conventionally as well if you want to, which is probably what you're normally going to be doing, unless you want a lot of attention. Heads will turn in the room if you flick these bad boys out. A lot of these Cold Steels with their triad locks, if you're not familiar with the triad lock, it's a lock back, but there's a stop pin in between the tang of the blade and the lock bar. Essentially, it makes the knife that much stronger. I'm not going to get into the details or the mechanics of it, but basically it's an extremely, extremely strong locking mechanism just by having that stop pin in there. And not only that, but Cold Steel also makes the lock bars on these relatively deeper than what you'd see on a normal lockback knife. The big disadvantage to the lockback style knives or triad locks, whatever, is the fact that you pretty much need two hands to disengage them. Liner locks all day long, you can play with them with one hand. Axis locks, the cage ball bearing lock from Spyderco, the arc lock from SOG. There's plenty of other locking mechanisms out there where you can open and close them with one hand. That's one disadvantage I will give these lockback and triad locking mechanisms, the fact that you pretty much need two hands to close them. You can close it with one hand, but you got to be kind of careful. Let go of the tension right around there. There's no half stop or anything, so you just got to be careful with it, where it feels like it'll stop and then clear it. I just would not recommend doing that. It can become an accident pretty quickly. So use two hands when you're disengaging and closing this knife. It is very comfortable. Again, a lot to hold on to. I love these cutouts. Very pronounced cutouts in here. Very smooth, very elegant, in a very brutish sort of way. Right here, this is sanded, it looks like, or just rounded out from the factory, so it's not uncomfortable to disengage it. I think it's the Cold Steel, which one is it? It's the Raja, that's it. My Cold Steel Raja 1, or sorry, Raja 2, this part right here, it's the same type of locking mechanism, but it's not rounded. It's very sharp. We have sharp corners. It's kind of uncomfortable to disengage it. It's not the end of the world. It's not like you're going to be disengaging your knife all day long, but they didn't sand it or round it all. This is nice, smooth, and rounded. So all the edges are very smooth and round right here. It's a nice touch they put on here. Talking about a reverse grip, it's going to carry just like that. This knife's slightly too big for my hand, actually. For reference, I have large size hands. You can see the knife's just slightly bigger than what my hand wants. If you've got a big, massive hand, just XL size or double XL, whatever, this knife's going to fit you beautifully. It is very comfortable, but it looks like it's slightly too big for me. You can even just see by the handle alone. My fingers have the handle wrapping around it almost perfectly. The choil right here, and then the butt end of the handle, I guess you'd call that. You can scooch up here if you want. We have somewhat of a choil that connects to the tang of the blade, or the ricasso of the blade right there. Again, very comfortable. There's no jimping right here. It would have been kind of nice to see that, but I don't really care that much. This jimping right here works surprisingly well. It may look really wide, like you took some typical sharp jimping and you just magnified the crap out of it. That's kind of what it looks like right here, and we have 3 pronounced cutouts. But it works really well. Your thumb kind of just digs into whatever one of them. You just kind of select which one you want to dig into. It actually locks it in pretty well. I'm surprised, based on the way it looks. It might be cheaper for them to manufacture it that way instead of doing a lot of little cutouts. I don't know. I know this is a tempered lock bar right here, so cutting into it's not probably the easiest chore when it comes to their tools and what they're using in the factory, but oh well. All right, let's talk about the blade steel. AUS-10A. Many of you may be familiar with AUS-8 or AUS-8A. The A stands for anodized. As far as I understand, I don't think it has really much of a performance difference compared to its unanodized counterpart. But AUS-10A is like AUS-8A, but it has considerable, actually a lot more carbon content in it. Everything else, the composition of it, I think is exactly the same. The only difference is there's a crap ton more of carbon they dump into it. I guess that's what that number means. I don't know who comes up with the names for blade steels, but yeah, the 10A, or the AUS-10, has more carbon content than AUS-8, which means I'm going to assume AUS-8 has more carbon than AUS-6, etc. Who knows? Blade steel names can be kind of random, but essentially what that means is this is going to probably get sharper. It's going to retain its edge a little bit longer. Carbon is a must in blade steels. Carbon is everything when it comes to edge retention and how sharp the knife can get, etc. Because the whole point of a knife is to cut stuff, right? And carbon is essentially one of the biggest, most important elements to a steel composition when it comes to getting the knife to be sharp and for it to keep its edge. So basically this is going to get a little sharper probably, but it will definitely retain its edge better than AUS-8, assuming the heat treatment is the same in the two steels you are comparing. For the longest time, Cold Steel has been using AUS-8A on a lot of their knives. They still have a few of them, but recently they upgraded to AUS-10. Before that, they upgraded. Some people, I think it's considered an upgrade. It kind of depends on who you talk to, but they use CTS-XHP, and they use CTS-BD1 on some of their knives as well for a couple of years. But right now, they're using AUS-10A, and this knife, as far as I understand, never had another type of blade steel. As soon as they started using the AUS-10A, they designed this knife as well, and that's the only one so far that it's had. So, again, as I'm filming this, there is no other version, but you never know. And by the way, this is the Formax Scout, not the Formax Elite, or the Formax, whatever they call the original version. This is supposed to be a more affordable version of that knife. That knife, I believe, has a G10 handle scale and has S35VN blade steel, and that one's hundreds. Oof, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But this one is overseas produced in Taiwan, and it's got a cheaper blade steel, AUS-10A. AUS-8A is great. It gets really sharp, and it sharpens up pretty fast, too. It just doesn't hold its edge on forever. I think it's a little bit better than the 8CR13 MOV. I think it's a little bit better than 440C and a lot of the usual suspects you'll see. 14C, 28, and 420HC. Like a lot of the blade steels you'll notice on the cheaper, more affordable, I say like sub-$60 knives. That's not the cheapest knife ever. Some people can't afford a $60 knife. Some people don't want to spend any more than 15 or 20 on a knife. Those usually aren't knife people, but I'm not going to get into that. Basically, I say AUS-10A is an upgrade from AUS-8A. The only problem is going to be it can rust on you a little easier. It can corrode on you just a little bit easier, but if you have a stonewash finish on here, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that'll smooth out the blade steel even more. It'll be even more difficult for it to corrode or rust, because it kind of seals in those pores there, because stonewashing, essentially they spend more time finishing the blade compared to some other finishes. It's a very, very smooth finish to put on a steel. Not only that, functionally, but I think it looks beautiful. It's my favorite blade finish. Absolutely gorgeous. Look at that. It's iridescent. Oh, I was so excited when Cold Steel upgraded from the bead blasting finish from most of their knives to the stonewash. A+ on that, Cold Steel. Okay. So what would you use this knife for? We know it's heavy, we know it's broad and wide. It's not the longest knife, though. Let's compare it to a very common Cold Steel knife, one of my absolute favorites, the Cold Steel Recon 1. I thought it was going to be about the same length of this one when I looked up the specs. I didn't, really research it or anything. I just briefly looked up its specs, and I was like, okay, it's going to be about the length of the Recon 1, probably because it's a 4-inch blade. Yeah, they both have 4-inch blades, but it looks like it's twice the size, almost, of the Recon 1. It's way thicker, it's wider, the blade is just massive. So although the cutting edge isn't that much longer than something else that may say it as a 4-inch blade, you have a wider blade, which means you're going to have more weight, which means it's going to excel at the chopping motion and the slashing motion. So you're hacking through trees or foliage, or basically hacking through thick crap, trying to cut stuff in half and break objects with the blade. You want a wider blade. You don't want something so skinny that it will shatter on you if you use it too hard. You have more weight that will help propel the motion of a hack or a slash, something like that. Dropping down all that weight will help. It makes it a little bit harder to use when going back up, but that's just the nature of the beast. You can't have you can't have the best of both worlds. So the width and the weight will help for harder use like that, but as far as EDC purposes go, as far as carrying it, you're going to notice it on you. It is a heavy, big knife. It's massive. Massive, massive. But as far as weight goes with knives, it doesn't really bother me. I don't get bothered by the weight in knives. I've talked about this on previous reviews, but we're talking ounces, we're not talking pounds, so I don't know. It's not like I'm carrying 10 pounds in my pocket or anything. It's less than a pound. It's all just above half a pound. Again, 10.2 ounces. It's heavy. It's really heavy for this length you're getting, though. That's going to turn a lot of people off. There's some people out there who are going to be like, oh, it's over 3.6 ounces. No thanks. I'm not even going to touch it. Well, you're absolutely going to despise carrying this knife if that's you. This is really, really heavy, and you don't get a whole lot of extra cutting edge for that. Some people can forgive having the super long, the super heavy knives that are really long. They have like a 6-inch blade, and it's like 8 ounces. Like, okay, fine, I'll take it. But you're not getting that with this. But you're getting width, and you're getting girth. A lot to hold on to. Really tough, massive, huge knife. I just think that's interesting. You know, it's not so long that it'll become cumbersome and difficult to carry as far as length goes. Again, that doesn't bother me either, but it might for some people. And some edges that are way too long, if you're trying to do a quick slicing motion or opening a box or something, you got to really back up there and then score the tip. This you will not have that problem with, because they basically, again, they enlarged, made it wider and fatter and thicker instead of longer as far as the knife's length is concerned. So that's very interesting to me. I don't see many knives like this. It's massive, it's big, it's just not a very long knife. It is long. Overall, it's a 10-inch knife. It's long, but it's not, it's not like over a foot or anything. Again, going back to the Cold Steel Voyager, this is a knife a lot of people, whoa, it's massive, and it's even lighter too. So you're looking for just function and defense. Yeah, the Voyager's gonna be a little bit faster, a little bit more nimble. It'll deploy out a little quicker, I think. But as far as hard use goes, and let's say you're out in the wilderness and this is the only knife you have, I'd probably go with the 4-Max, honestly. But as far as carry goes, you don't have something so long either. Sometimes you actually want it to be a little shorter and stubbier. They're both massive, massive folders. I immediately thought of the Spartan. We're kind of closing the review off here, but when I got this knife, the first knife I thought of was the Spartan, another Cold Steel. Now, this knife is massive. It's also a huge, wide knife. It's very similar in a lot of ways to the 4-Max, but the 4-Max Scout is actually heavier than the Spartan. The Spartan feels light in comparison. I'm actually amazed. The blade length is slightly shorter on the 4-Max, but the cutting edge looks to be about the same if you look very closely there. Similar blade steels. Let me just compare just real quick. I can't remember. AUS. Oh yeah, always also AUS 10. They upgraded to on the Spartan. Newer Spartan, by the way. It's not the bead blasted finish with the AUS 8. I think there was a run where they did CTX XHP on it or something, or CTS BD1. But nope, it's all AUS 10A now. Very, very, it's probably the closest knife Cold Steel made to the 4-Max is going to be the Spartan. I love the Spartan, but what I will say is I don't carry it all the time just because when I do have it in hand, it's just such an extreme design. It's really comfortable. I love it. But you pretty much only have this grip and then maybe this grip. Other than that, it's going to be uncomfortable just because the handle's so extreme. It's thinner, and it's a flush-mounted stainless steel liner, not a parallel-mounted one like that one. And another thing I don't like about the Spartan is the way it carries, or pulling it out. It carries fine, but pulling out of the pocket, you have very little to grip onto here. And then, although this is helpful, the thumb plate can help deploy it out of your pocket. You can wave it off. The problem is that it snags very commonly, and I don't like that. So the 4-Max Scout, for me, solves both of those problems in comparison. Much bigger pocket. Like, people will see it. It's going to be less covert, but I don't see this as a covert tactical blade. I see this more as like a survival blade, a knife that can do everything. Basically, a very heavy, big, hard-use knife that you depend on. Hard-working, hard-use folding knife. That's kind of the idea behind it. And it's just super cool, too. It's just a darn cool, heavy, big, fat knife. Similar to the Spartan, but I think a little bit more usable overall. Same exact materials, just a different shape. Spartan's got a different kind of cool to it. They're both really cool knives, but overall I think I like the Formax a little bit more. Anyway, let's close off the review finally. Just showing it next to a bunch of other big cold steels right here. Voyager XL, Formax, Scout, Spartan. Similar to the Spartan, in a lot of ways, actually very, very similar knife, but I just think it's a little bit more usable. It's a little bit pricey. Again, some people are going to look at this and go, AUS 10A, $85. I don't know. I know that's kind of expensive. Well, look at all the material you're getting right here. Now, yeah, there's plenty of knives out there that have like VG10 or they have a better blade still, but the blade's like this long and it's $100 and it's US made. You know, I love supporting US companies and things like that, but it's just, if you're talking simply about price and the product, that's when things get a little gray. Again, you can't just look at the blade still. I don't think there's other factors to observe. So anyway, that's it. One other thing I wanted to mention, this hole right here. I don't think anyone's talked about it or if the company talked about it, but I don't really know what that's for. The hole that's just below the tang of the blade. I just thought they'd make some like metal piece that can slip in there. You can screw in a little bolt or something, and then it keeps it in place almost like a fixed blade. I thought that's what that was for when I first got it. I was like, oh, they're going to make like an additional piece you can carry. That'd be kind of cool. I've seen some knives like that very rarely where they have a separate piece you can screw in to keep it in the open position. But anyway, kind of redundant. Not really sure what that's for. Who cares? The Formax Scout. Very good blade steel for the money. It's a sub $100 folder. It's absolutely massive despite not being super long. It's still a very, very, very long knife. It's just not like as long as an XL Voyager or something. But it's a big knife. There's a lot to hold on to. It's very comfortable. It's very strong. There's no way this thing's going to die on you. I mean, the full stainless steel liner's in there. And you're paying for it as far as weight goes. It's going to be heavy. It's not going to be the best EDC, but it's very functional. Once you get it in hand, this thing can do anything. Extremely strong, impressive folding knife. If you carry one of these around, and I was like, hey, what knife you got right there? You pulled it, I'd be impressed. It's a very impressive, powerful knife. Knives don't get much stronger than this. Pure brute strength right here. And it won't break the bank either. It's not like really expensive or anything. It's not cheap. Excellent cold steel option right there. It goes really well next to the Talwars, the Voyagers, the Rajas, the Espadas. It's one of the brothers of those guys, so. Or cousins, I should say. Anyway, that's it. That is the Cold Steel Formax Scout.